Welcome to the League of Women Voters of Palo Alto's presentation of the pros and cons of the 2014 California ballot measures. I'm Mary Jo Levy, and with me is my fellow League member, Gloria Holm. The League is a nonpartisan organization. That means the League never supports or opposes candidates or political parties, nor do we deliberately shape our education or advocacy on issues to benefit a political party. The League of Women Voters has two separate and distinct roles, voter service and advocacy. In our voter service role, we present impartial, nonpartisan information. This is what we are doing right now.
We will give you the facts about the ballot measures and arguments that the proponents and opponents are making about the proposal. We will not judge the merits of the argument or guarantee their validity. Today's presentation will provide background information on all 6 state measures. Because of the time limitation, we're not covering the 3 Palo Alto measures, which are the topic of a separate program on election coverage presented by the Media Center. So, Mary Jo, let's get started.
Proposition 1, the Water Bond Act. Bonds are sold to investors for large-scale projects that will last many years. Bond payments are the first obligation of the state before any other debts are served. Currently, California pays $5 billion from the general fund annually to repay previous bond issues. This measure authorizes $7.12 billion in new obligation bonds and reallocates $425 million in previously unsold bonds to fund various water-related programs. This measure began 5 years ago but never made it to the statewide ballot because of the size, poor projects, and difficulty of getting it passed by the voters during a recession. It is back again, partly because of concern about the statewide drought conditions. It will result in more or less $360 million a year in repayment costs. Most of the funds, 36%, will go for dams, and with groundwater replenishment and recycling efforts, this category accounts for 57% of the funding. That is the majority of the funding. 20% is allocated for protection of rivers, lakes, streams, and watershed. 18% is allocated for clean, safe, reliable drinking water, and 5% for flood management. Note, this measure does not involve or fund the controversial twin tunnel proposal. The measure authorizes continuous appropriation, which means that bond funds are not subject to the legislative budget process and go directly to the entity identified to receive them, in this case, the California Water Commission. These members are all gubernatorial appointees. This is a controversial feature of the bill, with those in favor saying this is necessary to provide a level of certainty for the high level of local investment and a way that appropriations are best insulated from legislative politics. Opponents to this concept of the California Water Commission say that the bond language guiding the commission favors surface storage over investment in underground storage, and that the legislators' oversight is an appropriate check on the governors. Some of the supporters' arguments in favor of the measure are that there have been no new dams in California in 40 years. Additional dams will allow California to manage water over varying periods of wet and dry, reducing reliance on groundwater. Proposition 1, the supporters go on to say, provides funds to develop safe drinking water, invest in conservation, recycling, and improve supplies. Proposition 1, they say, will help protect rivers, lakes, streams from pollution and contamination. Here are some of the opponents' arguments against the measure. New dams will not add appreciably to our ability to store water and would damage the environment, while diverting funds from projects that hold promise of creating true water security. Second, this measure piles on more debt, which would crowd out funding for other state projects, such as schools and public health, while subsidizing storage and water purchases that benefit a few powerful agricultural interests. The opponents also say Proposition 1 continues unsustainable exports of water from northern California rivers and the Delta to the San Joaquin Valley agriculture, threatening fisheries and related jobs.
Okay, now we're on the budget stabilization account. And the way it is now is that we do have a rainy day account, and this is designed to set aside money in good years and help balance the budget in bad years. Well, the rules for how the reserves work are in the state constitution, and we had it in Proposition 58 in the year 2004. This year, our state's general fund is about $110 billion, and we have about $300 billion in debts. And these debts are like paying pensions and retirement benefits that already are earned by public employees, and projects like highways and buildings. Well, what will Proposition 2 do? It is a little complicated, but it changes the rules of the state constitution about how much money goes into this budget reserve and how the money can be used. The reserve would get 1.5% of the revenues of the general fund, and in good years, additional funds will come out of the capital gains tax. And then for the next 15 years, half of the money would go towards paying off certain types of state debts. Proposition 2 would also create new state reserves for local schools and community colleges when the economy is doing well. When the economy is not doing well, they won't get money from this particular bond, from this particular issue. And the state law could change rules for local K-12 school districts in terms of their own reserves. What is the effect of the state? What is the effect of the state and local budgets? Under Proposition 2, the state government would pay down existing debt faster. For the next 15 years, there'll be less money available for other things in the budget. However, long term, less money would be spent on paying off debts because we would be paying them off earlier. The other portion of it, which is a trailer bill, is that new school reserves would receive money only occasionally and would not affect the total state funds given to school over time. New rules for local school district reserves will leave some districts with smaller reserves available in bad economic times. Now, the arguments for this proposition is that it will create stronger constitutional reserve and pay down the debts quicker. It'll protect and stabilize school budgets, and it'll shield taxpayers from unnecessary tax increases during bad times. The argument against is that it's a double standard. We have prudent reserves for the state, but it limits school districts from having their own reserves. And what happens then is that it increases school budgets by doing away with reserves, and then schools have to go out and borrow the money in the interim before the state actually pays them back. The people who are supporting it is Governor Brown, the legislature, Alan Zurenberg of the Chamber of Commerce, and Mike Hurst from the California State Board of Education, who is the chair. The opposition is from Educate Our State.
Thank you. On to Proposition 45, the health care insurance rate changes. Proposition 45 would require the elected insurance commissioner's approval of changes in certain types of health insurance rates with public notice, disclosure, and hearings on rate changes, very similar to a process that is currently used for other types of insurance. This measure does not apply to employer large group health plans or to federal programs such as Medicare. This measure does apply to individual and small group health insurance, which covers roughly 6 million Californians, excuse me, or 16% of the population. It will apply to covered California program, the Affordable Care Act program in our state. By way of background, 2 departments oversee health insurance in California. Currently, health insurance companies must file information on proposed rates for all individual and small group health insurance with one of the departments before any rate changes can go into effect. Insurance companies are not required to file large group rate information, as I mentioned earlier. Both of these departments review the rate information and say whether the increases are reasonable or not, but they have no authority to reject or approve the rates before they take effect. This measure makes current and future individual and small group health insurance rates subject to the rate approval process. The most significant fiscal effects of this measure on state and local governments are on state administrative costs. These net additional costs would likely not exceed the low millions of dollars annually, but could be higher. These costs would be funded not by the taxpayers directly, but from additional fee revenues collected from health insurance companies. According to the California legislative analysts, the new rate approval process could also result in additional costs for the Covered California program. Supporters of this measure say that health insurance rates have risen faster than inflation, and control of costs is needed now more than ever because everyone is required to have health insurance. Supporters also believe that Proposition 45 will control health insurance costs just as Proposition 103 controlled auto insurance costs by requiring justification for rate hikes. And their final argument is that it will promote transparency through the public process and help prevent unreasonable rate hikes. Opponents to this proposition say it gives too much power to one person, the insurance commissioner, which is an elected position. They also say it adds another level of bureaucracy to health care regulation, and also that marketplace negotiations under the Affordable Care Act could be harmed by this new regulatory approach, causing delays. There are long lists of supporters and opponents of this measure and major financial contributors. Here are a few more in addition to those on your screen. Those in favor include our U.S. Senators Feinstein and Boxer, United Teachers of California, the California Democratic Party, the Consumer Federation of California. Those against include the Board of Covered California, the California Medical Association, the American Academy of Pediatrics, and the California Association of Health Plans.
And now we come to Proposition 46, which is an initiative statute. Generally speaking, initiative statutes only cover one topic. This one covers 3 distinct topics. So let's start with the first. The first one raises the cap for pain and suffering lawsuits to $1.1 million, which is continually adjusted for inflation. And the reason why we had it was at $250,000, and this was established in 1975 with a micro cap. Well, today the $250,000 is equivalent to 1.1 million in real dollars today. That has been adjusted for inflation. And what this basically means is that economic damages are not included. Economic damages are medical expenses and lost wages, etc. This is non-economic damages, which includes pain and suffering, physical impairment, disfigurement, and generally a decline of the quality of life. That's the first part. The second part requires doctors to check a state database, before prescribing certain drugs. If the doctor finds that the patient has a prescription for the same or similar drug, the doctor is obligated to investigate the patient's medical condition. And the third area is the random testing of doctors will be conducted. This requires drug and alcohol testing of doctors following any adverse event, such as mistakes made during surgery, injuries from errors in medication, any event caused in death or serious disability of patient. This would be mandatory within 24 hours. And if other doctors know of or suspect a doctor who is on drugs or alcohol or has any kind of impairment, they too would be liable. And the board is then required to take disciplinary actions if the doctor was impaired. And the doctor will be billed for the drug test. And failure to submit to this testing would be basis for suspension. So let's start with the first one, the argument for the contingency fee. And based on the recovery, that it would be based, they charge a contingency fee based on the recovery on this non-economic situation. And today it is so low that many of the attorneys will not take the case because the fee is too low. It hasn't been changed for 39 years, and it's time to change it. And so we have to provide a higher level so that litigants would have more access to the legal system. The second argument for this proposition in terms of the database is that having doctors check with the database prevents doctor shopping. And that is that, patients would go to various doctors to get certain kinds of drugs. And using the database would reduce the amount of drugs prescribed, saving drug costs, and drug abuse would be reduced. And this would save lives and save dollars. And the third area about medical testing, this would prevent medical errors that take place. And we know it's the third cause of death. The supporters of this bill say that nearly 20% of health professionals suffer from substance abuse, and sometimes caused by their own career. Now, the arguments against this bill is that it would quadruple the cap on non-economic damages. It would increase the cost of malpractice insurance. It would cost state and local governments an increased cost of litigation and malpractice insurance. It would increase taxes and fees and or cut other government services. It would increase malpractice insurance and would cause many doctors to close their practice or move to other states. And the access to doctors would be reduced. The statewide database is subject to hacking. The medical board doesn't have the resources to administer the program. Negative consequences would outweigh the potential benefits. There would be higher costs of health care, higher taxes, lost access to doctors, loss of privacy by risking personal prescription drug history. And lastly, it was written and funded by trial lawyers. The people who are supporting it are consumer watchdogs, Congress of California seniors, and several bereaved families. In opposition is an interesting group, American Nurses Association, Citizens Against Lawsuit Abuse, California Small Business Association, California Association of Nurse Practitioners, the Gay and Lesbian Center, the American Civil Liberties Union, the California Small Business Association, the California Association of Nurse Practitioners, and the California Republican Party, and the Los Angeles County Democratic Party.
Proposition 47, criminal sentences, misdemeanor penalties is how the heading is on your ballot that you'll be receiving in the mail. Proposition 47 would reduce penalties for certain non-serious, non-violent crimes and focus prison spending on violent and serious offenders. The statute reduces lesser crimes such as certain drug possession offenses, petty theft, receiving stolen property, forging and writing bad checks, from wobblers to felonies, wobblers or felonies to misdemeanors. Now let me describe a few words about wobblers. Some crimes, such as check forgery or possession of stolen property, can be charged either as a felony or as a misdemeanor, thus wobblers. Courts decide how to charge wobbler crimes based on the details of the crime and the criminal history of the offender. So this measure allows continuation of the felony sentence for these offenses, that is, the less serious ones, such as petty theft, writing bad checks. It allows continuation of the felony sentence for these offenses if the person has previous conviction for crimes such as rape, murder, child molestation, or is a registered sex offender. This measure also allows certain offenders previously convicted of non-serious, non-violent felonies, which are described in the proposition, to apply for reduced sentences. This measure further requires that the annual savings to the state from the measure, as estimated by the State Finance Department, be transferred from the general fund into a new state fund, the Safe Neighborhoods and Schools Fund. This fund would support mental health and drug treatment programs, K-12 schools, and crime victims. During this election season, you may find this measure described by the fund name. The Safe Neighborhoods and Schools Fund measure is the same as the criminal sentences and misdemeanors penalty proposition. Proposition 47 would have a number of fiscal effects on the state and local governments. The size of these effects would depend on several key factors and are difficult to estimate because of lack of data and how certain provisions in the measure are implemented. The legislative analyst says the savings could reach hundreds of millions of dollars at both the state and county levels, primarily from freeing up prisons and jail capacities. Supporters for the measure say it prioritizes law enforcement resources on violent and serious crime. They also say it authorizes resentences for offenses without threat to public safety. And it uses savings in prisons spending to stop the cycle of crime, shifting those funds from the savings into victim services, mental health, drug treatments, and K-12 schools. Opponents of the measure say it will require the early release of felons, including those with violent criminal histories, such as robbery, assault, and identity theft. Opponents also say there are no quote-unquote petty criminals in our prisons anymore. First-time, low-level offenders are already sent to diversion programs. They also say it will burden the criminal justice system to implement it. On the screen, you will see the names of those who support and oppose. It includes law enforcement people on both sides of the measure.
Proposition 48. This is a gaming proposition that deals with the Indian casinos. Proposition 48 is a referendum which asks the voters to decide on a law that's already in place. The state law today allows Indian tribes to operate casinos on Indian lands if the tribe, state, and federal government agree. Currently, 58 tribes conduct casino-style gambling, which is not legal elsewhere in California. The new agreement have been negotiated with 2 tribes. One is the Norfolk tribe, which is located in Humboldt Bay, and the Wyatt tribe. The Norfolk tribe would be able to open a casino and hotel in Madera County on property that's not connected to their reservation in Humboldt County. The Wyatt tribe would agree not to open a casino in Humboldt County in return for the shares of the Norfolk casino profits. Well, what does this do? A yes vote would allow the Norfolk to proceed with the casino in Madera County and also prohibit the Wyatt from opening a casino in Humboldt County. A no vote rejects these compacts, and both tribes would need to seek a new agreement if they wanted to construct or operate a casino. The argument for is that Indian gaming was legalized in 2000, and it is good for the local economy. In fact, it provides 4,000 new jobs. It supports self-sufficiency at no cost to the taxpayer. It proposed casinos that would avoid development on environmentally fragile land in the Sierras and in Humboldt County by building it in Madera County. The argument against is that it opens the door to increases in the already large number of casinos nearby and in the state. And the revenue from Prop 48 would not go to education or to the general fund. The people who support it are Governor Brown, the California State Building and Construction Trade Council, the Board of Supervisors in Madera County, Central California Chamber of Commerce, the Board of Supervisors in Madera County. The argument against is Stand Up for California. There's a group that says keep Vegas-style casinos out of our neighborhood. The Nisei Farmers League, Harry Perea, a Fresno County supervisor, Moortown Ranchera, and David Rogers, Madera County supervisor. Thank you for staying with us during our discussion of the propositions. What we have presented today is not exhaustive of all the information for or against each measure. More information is always unfolding every day. However, our discussion was based on what was current as of this time. Remember, it's a privilege for you to vote. You will also be asked to vote for statewide officers, the bond, which is number 1, and the 5 statewide ballots. You do not have to vote on everything, but we hope that this discussion has piqued your interest and excited you to use your vote wisely. We look forward to seeing you or your ballot at the polls on November 4th. Thank you very much.